Okay, it's good to see you. Welcome back in today. Hope everybody's doing well. We're looking at the Redskins for the 2020 offseason, and we're going to start with the free agents, take a look at their cap space, some team needs, and then look at some of the cap savings options that they've got as well. How much money does Washington have right now, pretty much at this point in the offseason? They've got $62 million, okay? $62 million. That includes just about everybody, the dead cap hits. That includes the massive dead cap hit that they're going to have off the Alex Smith contract right this year. If they don't release him, which we haven't heard any word that they're going to, then they've got to pay him, I think, about $22 million this year. If they do decide to release him, like I suggested in an earlier video, it's about a $33 million dead cap hit. So no matter what, you're paying Alex Smith to be on the roster this year. That already includes that, though. $62 million is more or less, you'll see different numbers depending on how people want to package the numbers. $62 million is more or less the number that Washington has right here at the start of March. They've already created some of that cap space by releasing Jordan Reed, the tight end, by releasing Paul Richardson at wide receiver, and Josh Norman, of course, at CB, has created some of this cap space. They've got 62. If they wanted it, and they really don't need it, but if Washington wanted it, they could create even more cap space here with these three players. And I think the Trent Williams deal, of course, is going to happen sooner rather than later. In my opinion, and I suggested this back in December, Washington should have already taken care of the Trent Williams situation. They should have already made a way for him to exit to another team, so that Washington could have moved on. That didn't happen, so here we are. They've still got Trent Williams, but I think it's just a matter of time before they either release him outright or find somebody who's willing to offer something in a trade. That right there will clear up another $12.5 million for the Washington Redskins. Even after a dead cap hit of $2 million, you've got $12.5 of actual cap savings there, which will easily push them up into about $75 million in cap space, which is more than any team needs. Nobody in the NFL needs that much cap space, but Washington's got it, which gives them a lot of flexibility. Same thing here with Ryan Kerrigan. $11.7 million is his cap hit this year. I personally, just looking at things overall, you never look at things in a vacuum, I'd be in favor of kind of keeping Kerrigan around for one more season. But if they wanted to let him go and create even more cap space, they could do it with no dead cap hit at all, create another $11.7 million. That right there pushes you up to about $87 million in cap space, which is just insane to have that much cap space available. But Washington's got that if they want it. And there with Morgan Moses. Morgan Moses' cap hit somewhere around $8 million. $9 million, I think it's $8.5. If you released him, you'd have a dead cap hit of $3.8 million, which is a pretty stout dead cap hit, but it would free up another $4.8 million in cap space if you wanted to. I really don't think Washington's going to do that. We're going to look here in just a second. They've already got a lot of potential upheaval on the offensive line, an offensive line that was pretty decent last year. So I really kind of doubt that they're going to release Moses, but if they wanted to, just to create another $4.8 million in cap space, that's something that they could do. And this is the kind of thing that general managers look at all the time. If we need the cap space, where are we going to find it? These are three of the players that they could go to if they want to do that. Let's look at the free agents first, because I know a lot of you like to kind of duck in and just hit that, so we'll hit those very quickly, and then we'll move over to some of the other things for Washington this offseason. By far, the biggest free agent decision of the year for the Redskins is Brandon Scherff, starting guard, not just a starting guard, but this is one of the best guards in football right now. He's an elite guard, I think borderline elite guy. How much is it going to cost to keep him? I think if Washington is able to keep him, I would imagine he'd probably give them just a little bit of a shaver of a discount. So Washington could probably get him for $11 or $12 million a season, maybe $11.5 million a season on average. If he hits free agency, and if he were to hit free agency, he'd be the best guard on the market by far, I'm sure. I can't imagine any other guard better than him being on the market this season. His services could go as high as $14 or even $15 million a season, depending on who's wanting to try to get him and if more than one team gets into a bit of a bidding war with him. So we've got him there at $13 million, but that could go down or up, depending on the situation and what Brandon Scherff wants to do and how much money he really wants to try to go after. So very large. My personal feeling, and most NFL executives don't agree with this, my personal feeling is that I would much rather spend a very high first-round draft pick, even a top 5 draft pick on a guard, than I would to spend this kind of money right here at guard, because it just ties up more resources. I can take that cap space and I can get other guys who can fill in other spots, other veterans, for $2 and $3 million, and those get to be very important guys. You think about it, for $13 million or even 12, I could find 6 other guys who may not be lockdown starters in the NFL, but they are borderline starters, and I can really fill in a lot of other spots. I can't do that with my draft picks. Even if I take all 7 draft picks, there's no way I'm going to be able to fill out 6 or 7 starter or borderline starter spots with those draft picks in a single season. So that's my personal preference. But most NFL executives, and since they're making a lot of money to make these decisions, will yield to their expertise on this. Most NFL executives would rather keep a guy like Brandon Scherff around because he's been so good for the past few seasons. Because of his age, it looks like he will continue to be this good for the next 4 or 5 seasons. He's certainly not just a one-hit wonder. So most NFL executives will pay this kind of money right here to keep a very good player around. And there's no doubt that Brandon Scherff is an excellent player, and there's no doubt that he will make this kind of money for somebody. I suspect Washington will make every effort to keep him around, and you can hardly blame a team for wanting to do that. Okay, you've worked hard to find somebody this good in the draft, and he's been good not just for one season, but for just about every season. So you can hardly blame a team for wanting to keep a player like that around and on the roster. After that, the importance of your decisions as far as how many resources they tie up, the resources really drop off. After that, Eric Flowers and Donald Penn. These are 2 more of your starting offensive linemen. So between Moses here on the options side of things and the free agents here, you've got 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen right here on the board. With Flowers, for about $4 million, I think you could keep him around. I don't think most fans of any team would necessarily want Eric Flowers to be a starting guard on their team, and I understand that. Flowers came over from, he was originally with the Giants. Kind of disappointed there, didn't live up to the draft pick, of course, but he still provides depth, he still provides athleticism, and Flowers is a guy who maybe I don't want him starting, but if I've got enough good starters around him, I'm not totally uncomfortable with him being a starter on the offensive line. Can I upgrade here? Yeah, I probably can upgrade here, but will I be able to do it this offseason? For $4 million, I can bring a guy back who is a borderline NFL starter. He's not a lockdown starter by any stretch, but he's a borderline starter for $4 million, even if he gets pushed off onto the bench. And I have 2 guys at guard who are better than Flowers. Even if I'm spending $4 million on him to just provide depth, you could make the argument that $4 million isn't too high a price tag, because you know at some point during the season somebody's going to get injured, and I'm going to need somebody to step up and play on the interior of that offensive line. I'd rather it be somebody who's already been on the team, somebody who's already had a lot of starting experience for me. So you can make the argument there. We'll see what Washington wants to do with that. That's kind of a borderline argument to me. $4 million here for a guy like Flowers. Donald Penn. Penn's been around forever, and he's usually been very good. And he was good for Washington last year. At some point, Donald Penn is going to just decide to retire. And I haven't heard if he's actually decided to do that this year or not. But as long as Penn is interested in playing, I'm interested in having Penn on my team. The guy just shows up and works every single game. He's not the player he used to be 5 years ago or 8 years ago, but he's still a good, solid player. He shows up. His performance is solid. And for about $2 million, I could have him start at tackle. And listen, if he hasn't dropped off by now due to age, you have to wonder, can he have another decent season there starting for me at tackle? So I would be surprised if Washington just tells Penn to take a hike. But other teams have done that before with other players. So we'll see what they want to do. But right here, Donald Penn, you've got a guy who started for you at tackle, played pretty decently for only $2 million. It's really low risk. Even if it doesn't work out, you could always cut him and probably have a dead cap hit of somewhere around $600,000, $700,000. I would think it would be very small. There's almost no risk, though, in having a guy like Penn here on the football team, who's really just a very workhorse guy. Used to be an uber talented guy over the years, of course, has lost a bit of a step, but very much value right there for Donald Penn at $2 million to have his services. Tony Bergstrom there on the interior of the offensive line at center, only going to cost you about $1 million to keep him around. It may not even cost that much, maybe $700,000 or $800,000. If Washington, which they've already got a starting center in Roulet, Chase Roulet, I think is his name, so they don't need a starter at center. But if Washington decides to keep Bergstrom around, that's probably an indication that they're not overly happy or not overly excited about the prospects of Pierschbacher there on the interior of the offensive line. If they decide to let Bergstrom go, that's probably more an indication that they like what they've seen out of Pierschbacher moving forward, enough that they feel comfortable having Pierschbacher kind of be the backup center and the reserve emergency backup guard as well, and maybe let Bergstrom go here and save that $1 million minus cap space. Okay, so we'll see there. Chris Thompson at running back, $2 million, I think, to keep him around. They had a decent running back by committee last year. A lot of NFL teams are doing this. You know, you've got 2 or 3 different guys who can kind of catch the ball, run the ball, block a little bit. Washington had that, but they already put $3.5 million more into getting Adrian Peterson to come back. I think they did that about a week ago. So I would be a little bit surprised if they take an additional $2 million and give it to Thompson. Wouldn't be shocked, but I would be a little bit surprised. You already have Geis there, Darius Geis there, along with Adrian Thompson. Wouldn't be surprised to see Washington maybe just add another 5th or 6th round draft pick here, or maybe even undrafted free agent in at running back. My guess would be that Thompson is probably going to go on and move to another team. John Bostic at linebacker. Bostic's an interesting guy. When Bostic came out of Florida, had a good bit of potential, has never lived up to that in the NFL, but you still see that the athleticism is there. He's 6 seasons in. Last year, he played over 1,000 snaps for Washington. Do I want Bostic to be my starting linebacker? Absolutely not. But for $2 million, I can bring a guy back who at least gives me some depth. Even if I find 2 linebackers who are better than him to start and put out there on the playing field, Bostic struggles in just about all areas of the game, but he's not so pitiful. And I'm not trying to insult him in particular, but he's not so bad at everything that I just can't stand to see him on the field. Bostic's the guy who I'd like to bring back. That takes a little bit of pressure off me as an organization that I'm not now looking for linebackers and got to have one. If, worst case, $2 million, I bring back Bostic at linebacker, I've got what I had last year at linebacker, and I'm able to upgrade at other positions. So if I decide to go ahead and find other linebackers for $2 million, I've got a guy here who I can bring in off the bench, bring in case of an injury, who's started for me a lot. He's familiar with the other players on the team. So I like the idea of bringing Bostic back. I don't like the idea of him starting for me. We'll see what Washington wants to do with that as they go forward. We end up here on the free agent side of things with Keenum and McCoy. I really wouldn't expect them to bring both guys back, probably one or the other. Both guys seem to be very capable backup starters, backup quarterbacks. My point is, with them, they both have a good work ethic. They both seem to have pretty good attitudes. Neither one of them is going to cost you a lot, maybe $4 million for Keenum, $3 million for McCoy. Both guys seem willing to work with other young quarterbacks to try to mentor them along a little bit, especially McCoy, I would think. So McCoy's been there with Washington for longer. We'll see what they do. My guess is they'll bring back one of these guys and not both of them moving forward. We'll find out about that. So those are the free agents here. I think these are the top 8. If you've got a couple other people that you think are more important than somebody I've got here, that's fine. Every NFL team has 25 or 30 guys. I just tried to pick out what looked like the top 8 here for Washington to be concerned about for this off season. How bad were we? 3-13. No surprise. Everybody knows what Washington was last year. They really struggled. They're really missing a lot of talent on offense. They've got talent on defense, but a lot of it's young, a little bit of it's raw, a little bit of it's undeveloped. You've got to think that Washington's going to get better on defense moving forward. Just how bad were they on offense? Number 31 in yards per game, number 32 in points per game. No surprise when you've got a quarterback who's young and he doesn't have a whole lot of weapons to throw to, at least not exceptional weapons. And when the offensive line is decent, not great, but decent, and when, it's just not a good combination here, and especially when you saw the coach have to change during the early part of the season. So Terrible on offense. We know Washington knows that. They're going to try to upgrade, probably get more weapons for the quarterback to throw to. Defense, it looks really bad. Number 27 and number 27, yards per game, points per game, respectively. I almost had a heart attack when I saw these statistics, because when I did this video for Washington back in December, before the season had ended, they were ranked something like number 18 defensive yards per game given up and number 20 in points per game given up. And so when I rolled over here and I looked at it again just a couple of days ago, I saw that, man, they're number 27, 27. Did I get this wrong back in December? But what happened was Washington gave up, I think, 46 and 47 points the last two games of the season. I think they might have given up 41 points in the third to last game of the season. They really crushed. I mean, they really got crushed on defense and offense right in those last two games against, I think it was the Giants and the Cowboys. They really had a struggle there at the end of the season, and because of that, the statistics dropped all the way down to almost the bottom of the league. They really were not that bad when you looked at their whole season. They had a slow start defensively in September. When they started to move through October and November and early December, they were really holding their own for the most part. 2 or 3 breakdowns, 2 or 3 weeks where they really struggled, but for the rest of the time, you were seeing them hold decent offenses to 9 points, 12 points, 15 points, 21 points. And I think what you saw are the ups and downs of a young defense. And by the end of the season, and I alluded to this in December, even before we saw the statistics drop to this level, you saw a defense that was young and tired and really lacking any bit of confidence that their offense could come up with any kind of points to even make the team competitive. So I think that's what you saw there at the end of the season, and I think it just kind of all came to a crashing halt. The defense is better than this. They're a lot better than this. This really is a middle-of-the-pack defense who, if they grow a little bit more, and you would think a young defense would grow a little bit more, they all look like they're guys who belong in the NFL. They don't look like guys who are going to fail. So you've got young guys who look like they belong. You would think that they as a group would continue to grow and develop and get better. This was really, for most of the season, a middle-of-the-pack defense who, because they're young, if you add another piece or two at safety or at CB or maybe an edge rusher or maybe a couple of solid linebackers, if you add a couple of pieces on defense, could slide very quickly from this right here to being an actual statistical top 10 defense. And most teams can't say that. Most teams cannot move from being a bottom-end defense statistically, which by the end of the season, statistically, that's what Washington was, to a top 10 statistical defense or defensive unit the following season. But Washington has the chance to do that, because in reality, when you looked at their personnel and when you looked at what they were throughout October and November and parts of December, when you looked at that, you saw a team that was really a middle-of-the-pack defense, and you see a team that is young on defense and should get better. And if you help them out by adding another piece or two, maybe a linebacker and a CB, you've got a team who could slide up into the top 10 defensively and really cause some problems for offenses moving forward in 2020. We'll take a look at that moving forward. What are their team needs? I've got them all broken down here and a little bit color-coded. So black is decent, green is good, and red is horrible. On the offensive side of the football, you've got quarterback right here. And I left it in the black, even though the performance wasn't good last year with Haskins. Haskins struggled a lot last year. He showed some flashes. I have heard everything about Haskins, from the idea that he's going to be absolutely terrible and the Redskins should draft another quarterback as quickly as possible, to, well, the Redskins believed in him and he did show flashes and they should just go with him going forward for the next season or two. My thought is this, that you're decent at quarterback right now because you do have a young guy and you need to give him a couple of offensive weapons and give him a season and see what he can do. We're not yet at a point in the NFL, I think maybe in 5 or 10 years we will be. Almost every other position in the NFL, no matter who you've got there, no matter how good the guy is or how young the guy is, you always require them to compete for the job. In the NFL, we're still kind of under the mindset that a quarterback, if you've got a guy who's young and you spend a heavy draft pick on him, you really don't want to bring in another guy to compete with him because it tends to split the locker room, and it tends to make a lot of players start to divide up between who they want to start. So I think that will change over the next 5 to 10 years. There's starting to become a mindset of draft a quarterback every season or every other season until you get your guy. And even if you get your guy, it would be nice to have a guy back there in case your guy gets injured or in case you have a contract dispute with your guy. We're not there yet in the NFL. I think in 5 to 10 years we will be, but we're not there yet. So I figure Washington either goes ahead and trades him away and drafts another guy, or just goes through the season with Haskins. Probably the best thing to do would be go ahead and keep Haskins for another season while you build up the roster. If after 2 seasons you've seen Haskins, you've seen him get a chance to play, you've given him a couple of weapons to actually throw to, maybe somebody besides McLaren and Peterson, you get him a tight end. If after another season you're not happy with him, then go ahead and move on. I totally understand that, but for this year, I would think the best thing, the best money, the smart thing would be to go ahead and give Haskins a season there. Wide receiver, you've got McLaren there. After McLaren, you've got a couple of other halfway decent receivers, so you could really use another wide receiver here. You could really use another weapon for Haskins to throw to. I think especially just a good, solid slot receiver. Slot receivers, oddly enough, are still a bit undervalued in the NFL. Not a lot of teams are making a lot of effort to get a guy who can just get you 5 yards, just get you 8 yards, just knows how to operate within just barely inside the hash marks. Just outside the hash marks is a guy who can really do a lot of damage slot-wise. Not a lot of teams are still pursuing that, even though we've seen teams have success with it. But here at wide receiver, you're solid at wide receiver because you have McLaren and because you have a couple other guys who are decent there at wide receiver, but you're not great. So certainly you could add somebody there. Running back, we already addressed that. You've got Peterson, you've got guys. If you want to bring back running back by committee for another $2 million, you've got Thompson. But Washington doesn't have to do anything there at running back if they don't want to. Tight end has really become an emergency spot. You let Jordan Reed go, which I think was smart to do because you saved about $8.5 million in cap space. You weren't going to be great even if Reed was there. You could really make the argument that even if Reed came back, you still needed another tight end. Certainly with Reed gone, now you very desperately need a tight end, and you need a good one. So we'll see what Washington does there, if they want to address that through the draft with a draft pick. They have so many needs everywhere. To me, though, if you keep Moses, and if you bring back Scherf, and you bring back Penn, and maybe Flowers comes or goes, and you expect to have a decent offensive line just based on what you've already got right here on the board, and you've got Roulier at center, I expect that Washington is going to be trying to get weapons for Haskins to throw to. So I would really think that they would go out and use a draft pick here at tight end, maybe even add a veteran tight end too, and just try to really make sure they've got tight end locked up there. But that is one of the biggest positions of need for Washington in this particular offseason. Tackle, guard, and center, I think we've covered that enough. If you brought everybody back at guard and center, you're actually very good there on the interior offensive line with Scherf and with everybody else that you have. And then at tackle, you're not great, but if you have Penn there, you're pretty decent there at tackle. So I don't think there's any emergency there on the offensive line. You just understand that the line is getting a little bit older, and if you don't address it this offseason, you're going to have to address it next offseason. Back over to the defensive side of the football. At cornerback, I put it in green and red for 2 different reasons. You've got Quentin Dunbar back there, who was one of the best cover corners in all of football last season. Had an outstanding season. Goodness gracious, he had one of the best seasons we've seen out of a CB last year, and he's very, very young. After Dunbar, though, I mean, it's just like falling off a cliff. You have nobody there with any talent at CB. Even when you had Josh Norman on the roster last year, he struggled. He lost a starting job. He probably shouldn't have been a starter all last year. He has really struggled ever since he got to Washington. So Norman is gone, but even if Norman had been there, after Dunbar, there's a massive drop-off in talents and in performance last year and for the last couple of seasons there. So after Dunbar, you were in desperate need of getting another CB, even if it's just a slot corner, okay? It doesn't have to be a CB2. Even if you just get a bit of a nickelback back there, somebody who can cover somebody. After Dunbar right now, you have nobody. So you need to get somebody back there at CB, and there are guys available. If you cannot find the guy you want at CB2, or if you draft somebody and you just think, well, he's not really going to plug the hole this season, it'll be another season or two before he steps up and flourishes as a starter, you can find slot corners and nickel corners in free agency who can really help you just kind of take some pressure off there in pass coverage. So I really think Washington needs to address that a lot. At safety, you're okay. You have Collins back there, who you signed to a lot of money a year ago. He didn't play overly well last year. He didn't play bad last year. He was just decent, probably not playing up to the money that you signed him for. But you've got Collins back there. He'll definitely hold back one safety spot. So you're not bleeding at safety, but you could certainly add another safety back there to really help you in pass coverage. The way the NFL is playing right now and the way some of the NFL teams are building their defenses, cover guys are really getting harder and harder to come across and becoming more important. And the thinking behind it is, ever since the NFL changed the rules to where you couldn't hit quarterbacks as hard as you want to, anytime you want to anymore, you really have to be soft hands with them. And ever since the NFL changed the rules about how defensive backs have to treat wide receivers coming off the line of scrimmage, you got that 5-yard bump and then that's it. If you don't jam them, what a lot of teams right now are faced with is offenses, because of the way the rules are built, offenses can get rid of the football quicker than your best edge rushers can get to the quarterback, quicker than your best edge rushers can even exert any pressure or influence on the quarterback. So because of that, you are left with, as a defense, just trying to create an umbrella, and hopefully a confusing umbrella, just to try to hinder the quarterbacks a little bit, try to hinder their thinking, try to hinder what they're seeing, and just try to provide a blanket long enough for your rushers to get there is what defenses are left with. So the value at CB, the importance of CB and even safety and even a linebacker who can cover a little bit in the passing game, those values are going up. And so at safety here, if you can get somebody in here at safety, or if you can bring somebody in at linebacker, which is the other horrible position on the team right now, somebody who can cover in the passing game, it will take pressure off your defense, give your front line time to start getting to the quarterback. Linebacker is the other really horrible position. Linebacker is trending the way of running back. It's not as important now in the NFL game as it used to be. That's not to say it's unimportant. That's also not to say that it's gone all the way down to the number value, the cap value that running back has gone down to. But if you're looking for a way to improve, linebacker is a way to do it. This is somebody who can step up, find somebody who can stop the running game, maybe go back and cover and pass coverage a little bit better than what you've currently got with Sean, Deion Hamilton, and John Bostic. Defensive tackle and edge rushers, I really like what the Redskins have right here for now. Especially in the defensive tackle area. If they do let go of Kerrigan, I think that starts to open up a little bit more of a need there on the edge rusher position. But I think on the interior of the defensive line, I think you've got an excellent rotation. Nothing to worry about there. As a matter of fact, I think it's pretty strong there. Could actually grow and get better there. When you combine the whole defensive line together, it's true you don't have any top-notch edge rushers, but we're seeing lots of teams win right now who do not have top-notch edge rushers to really get heavy pressure on the quarterback. They're just, as a defensive line, trying to be solid, trying to exert continued pressure on the offense. When you're Washington, you're pretty safe here on the defensive line. All right, we've covered a lot here. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll see you next time. Hope you enjoyed the off season. Have a great one. Goodbye.